Hey, welcome to the Upload Iceberg. If the upload is the content you see above the water as the viewer, I'll cover the journey and data behind growing a YouTube channel that you can't see in the murky depths below the surface. I'm Dan, this is episode 12, recorded after hitting 3,600 subscribers on March 7th, 2024. Today is the 10th, and unlike last time, we have uploaded a batch of new videos, mostly around the Canon R7. We'll talk about those. And I uploaded these in pretty quick succession. None of them are killing it, so I want to talk about this concept of relative zero. We'll touch on some camera news briefly, as there's been a lot. And I'll talk a little bit about packing for a trip today, as I have a big one coming up. And we can talk about maybe what videos are upcoming because of that. And we'll review channel analytics like we normally do. Let's start there. But before we do, if you're new, if you're coming in between subscriber numbers 3,500 and 3,600, welcome. We'll say hello to 3,601, 2, 3, and 4 as well that have been coming in. Hello. This is usually a video podcast where I let you maybe watch me like a little zoo animal chained to my desk. But that was going to be a bit much to do today. I'm away from home for the week. It was a little too far to bring the full video setup. Feeling a little bit overwhelmed with what I need to get done in the near term. So going audio only and screen recording, that should shave off at least an hour or two from the production of this. And I have a ton of memory cards to clear before that trip. So this will help on that front as well. But yeah, if you're new, we check in on the pod every new 100 subscribers. We take a look at the channel analytics and we talk about a smattering of topics. It's kind of a space, and I like to have this space to kind of discuss past and upcoming videos where we can do so at a slower pace. We're not too worried about the podcast analytics themselves. And the milestone period that we're looking at today is going to be the last 28 days, as always, February 11th through March 9th, 2024. For the thumbnail, now because I'm not on video, I have really no clue what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to make something up on the fly at the time I upload, probably, which is, and we'll get to this later, exactly what you do not want to do. So I would strongly recommend against that traditionally. This thumbnail will probably be not super effective because I'm going to do that today. All right, so we've been benchmarking every 28 days. If we look at these analytics, they are pretty flat from a view perspective, which is great when I'm not dropping videos. I've said in the past, I really like to see that continuous baseline traffic when I'm not dropping videos. When I am dropping 3 videos, particularly 3 at a time, I don't love to see how flat it still is. You can see some slight bumps for these videos as I've put them out, but nothing crazy. It's been, you see 1485 views here in the last 48 hours. Pretty typical as I pop open YouTube Studio to see 1,400, 1,500 views in the 48 trailing hour period. So nothing abnormal there. Audio only listeners' views were 22.6 thousand in this period. That averages to roughly 807 a day, down from 935 a day in the previous period. If we look at that period over period, so February 11th through March 9th for this current period, compared to last time we looked at the podcast, January 7th through February 3rd. Last time in purple, we can see that the not a holy trinity Canon R6 and R8 camera bag was cranking at the beginning of that period. So that's why we see this big differential, a couple thousand views here. Other metric milestones in this period, we've got 1,000 watch hours, a little bit more than normal, but down slightly from the last period, which was 1,200 hours of watch time. You can see, again, some small spikes around the video releases. We've got 80 subscribers coming in for this period, down from 145. That's why if you love the pod, it's been a while since we've been back on here, really slowing down after the trail off of the Not a Holy Trinity video, a little bit longer between episodes. If we look at the breakdown of subscribers, nothing stands out crazy. We have on this RF 70-200 f4 video, the 2-year review, we've got 13 subscribers of that 80, 10 of them coming in from the small and mighty RF 28 pancake review. And then after that, kind of a committee, bringing in the rest of that 80. Whatever 80 minus 23 is, 57. The other 57 coming in through committee here. This is actually interesting to note for later when we talk about upcoming videos. It's actually good to see these at the top for this period because I'm going to have some related content probably coming out for these 2 lenses. So that'll keep the ball rolling there. It'll be good for, if people are coming in for these videos, it'll be good to give them something else related. That'll be interesting from the trip perspective. If we go back and look at revenue, we are up to $76, which is higher than the 68 from last period. And really kind of the CPM we talked about this last time, the CPM took this massive jump up in February. Ooh, this is views. Let's look at CPM. Cost per meal. So January to February, CPM launches from 637 to 841. The biggest jump in a pretty long time after a dip in October 2022. So big jump, and that's, March is just starting, but so far sustained in March. A big reason why, we're seeing period over period views are down, revenue is up, a little bit of gravy there. Click-through rate is 7.4, about the same as usual. Average view duration down to 250. It was all the way at 303. Again, I don't worry too much about this. We have some shorter videos coming out in this grouping of 3 that we'll talk about. So naturally, this makes sense that it's going to fall a little bit. If we break down the AdSense by day, the average is $2.70. High day was $4.44, and the low looks like $1.86. So some good variability there in this period. And yeah, videos released. We got 3 out. We'll look at them. I know you're not here for this, but I also got 2 sponsored videos out on my hockey channel during this period as well. So it was a little bit of a nutty time period for me. I wouldn't recommend working on 5 videos at once, all due to come out at the same time when you're not doing this full time. It's just a little bit too much. There may be some interesting affiliate marketing takeaways to touch on for those videos in the future. So I'll probably let that data trickle in a little bit more, but the company that sponsored those videos, not getting a ton of views on those videos so far, at least compared to the camera channel. But I think they are positioned well for search long-term, fingers crossed. And the data that I'm seeing from the affiliate marketing front so far is really positive, really high conversion rates and good tracking with the company that I've worked with. So if you're someone listening to this podcast, making content, you're exploring affiliate marketing as a way to monetize and further that content. I'm no expert, but certainly playing around with different programs to find something that's fitting, to find something that converts really well, and find companies that are willing to do that experimentation with you, kind of going into those relationships knowing, this might resonate really well with my audience, this might not. That's super valuable. And that's not to say that the companies I've worked with on the camera channel haven't been willing to experiment at all. Exactly the opposite. They've been great as well. But the stuff that I've seen on the hockey channel converts, at least so far, just at a massively higher rate. So perhaps that'll be something to dedicate a whole episode to in the future. All right, so let's look at these videos. At a high level, first off, February 12th, we had the R7 review where we looked mainly at pictures from the R7, RF70-200, f4, and the 100-400. So really trying to get some of that extra reach out of those 2 zooms. Put the R7 to the test. This was a period, the fun side of making 5 videos all at once, 3 of them being the camera views, is I just shot a ton on the R7. Like I haven't done a lot of personal shooting in the last month really since these have come out. And I already miss kind of like that frantic month of just exploring that camera and shooting in a different way and some of the images that I got from that. So I'm missing the personal shooting right now. I know that I'll get probably more personal shooting than maybe even I want on the trip. So it's not a huge worry for me. It's not like I've put the cameras away, but I am excited to get back and shoot some more soon. The next video after that, I titled Getting Views with Reviews. That video was sponsored by Recut. And the idea here was really to take the podcast video crash course, do something much shorter, much more targeted for people in this audience, potentially also looking to make YouTube reviews, and sort of similar results. We'll get to the results, but sort of similar results in that it hasn't resonated. I mean, maybe if you're listening to this podcast, that video did resonate with you, but beyond this group of people listening to the podcast, I just don't think there's a lot of people in the audience here that are necessarily looking for this information. It's one of those videos that I think is pretty dense, pretty solid, hopefully helpful. You see a little of that coming through in the comments, but overall, really one of those things, one of those videos that I want to have long-term here as an artifact that I can, anybody interested in starting in content creation on YouTube, something that I can take that URL, point them to, and something, again, created with the backing of a product that I've just used continually for months and months and months. Recut, I can't say it enough for anybody listening that might be interested in trying it, maybe trying to tighten up their workflow. It has just saved me tons of time over the last several months. You see in a lot of these online editing tools, like this remove silence functionality, and I haven't tried a lot of them, and it's partly because Recut works so well. It's a native Mac app, so it just works really, really fast locally on your own files. the online stuff based on what other people are saying or tutorials that I've seen seems to work pretty well as well. But again, anytime you're using, for example, I use the Riverside editor to upload videos, to get transcripts, to pull some of these timestamps. I'm using their magic clips. So I'm trying to test and use their functionality pretty heavily, at least pretty heavily for someone who's not doing remote podcast recording with guests anyway. And I think they have a remove silence, but recut's just super fast. If you're making a lot of video content, I think you should check it out because it's faster than all the online tools and it's a one-time payment. Not thrilled by how this performed. We'll look a little bit closer in a second, but really excited to have this artifact. And I've redone the thumbnail for the video podcast 101 crash course using the channel banner, changing the text and titles to really kind of have, okay, these two videos fit together. They're part of me experimenting in, what would be like tutorials or like course-like tutorials. They're not super fitting for this audience here, but I've learned a ton and I'll continue to experiment with videos of this style like this that are more fitting, that hopefully will really resonate with a broader portion of this audience at some point here soon as I continue to experiment. And potentially, this is kind of the baseline level of experimentation I want to do as I think about offering products in the very, very long term. The more I think about product offerings, the pickier and pickier and less I know what I would ever offer to people here. I think, partly because 3,600 subscribers is pretty small. So I just don't know, I'm not sure exactly what I could offer that would have mass appeal at this point yet for now. And then the third video was the R6 versus R7 versus R8. Canon mirrorless, kind of the middle lineup comparison here. It's a tight 5 minutes and 19 seconds in this video. I'm just trying to give you a pretty quick rundown about how I think about the differences in these three cameras, what you should be thinking about if you're considering one of the three, if you already have one of the three and you're trying to add a second, kind of how I view that choice. And to sum it up, these are, you can see the views here. These are all kind of relative, we'll call them stinkers. So let's look at them individually. Then we can touch on, I think the broader point that I want to make here is kind of that concept of relative zero that I mentioned at the start. So let's go in here. Let's first look at the Canon R7 zooms video. This has 747 views in the first 27 days, picking up a few subscribers and a few bucks, slightly above my normal range. Now, this typical range, if you're familiar with YouTube Studio, you don't really want to think of mine as super accurate. I think when you're down in this level, like this sub 1,000 views, a lot of these podcast episodes fall into this band. And so you're seeing this really aggressive trail off 30 days in, and it looks like kind of no growth is going to happen. And that is how these podcast episodes look. And there's as many of these episodes as videos over the last 9 months or so. So this typical band is skewed. You can see this video is slowly starting to break away from its initial traffic at day 16. So most of this is search, as I would expect. Let's see what we got for search terms. Really around the R7, which is good to see. A slight uptick in impressions around that same 14, 15 day period. So we'll see how this one turns out. It doesn't have a great click-through rate, 5.3, a little bit longer average view duration than normal, but it's a longer video than my typical as well. This retention graph, again, still seeing that like pretty precipitous drop in the first 30 seconds that I've been really trying to fight. I did make a little bit of progress on this in the R6, R7, R8 comparison, so we'll look at that in a second. But I don't know, the relative retention isn't that great either. So this is just one that, I'm not super happy with how it's done so far, but I think if it falls a little bit deeper into the R7 search and browse traffic, and maybe even into the suggested traffic for R7 stuff, maybe we'll see an uptick we can revisit. I do like to see kind of this inflection point where it bounces off of its old trajectory. We'll see how that goes. But had higher hopes for this video for sure. If we look at get views with reviews, this has pretty bad signals to YouTube that it should be shown, right? So we've seen 180 views and then it levels off immediately at this bottom end of normal. Only 7 watch hours. We've got a pretty poor subscriber signal here, -3 subscribers on this video. So this is broadly not what you guys want. I get it. But again, it's one of those things that I'm excited to make, that I want to practice making, that I had the opportunity to work with a sponsor for, that I have a sponsor willing to experiment with some affiliate marketing on. Just kind of like, it checks all those boxes that we normally talk about here, except for the fact that you're not eating it up. So it's got all but one ingredient. And they're all equally important. But obviously, if you're listening to this, a big one is to make sure that you're getting value out of it. And clearly not too many people from my existing audience are. As such, like pretty poor click-through rate to the group that this was pushed out to initially, and pretty poor average view duration for, again, kind of pushing 11, 12-minute video would really, like if this were a lens review, 12 minutes long, I would definitely hope for a little bit more here. So again, I don't have high hopes that this will pick up. This is one of those videos that could maybe find some search outside of my existing audience slowly, if YouTube is even still testing this, or if it does test it again, in which case it's possible. Like, I don't know, I'm not getting good data, right? I don't know if YouTube thinks this is a good video. I don't know if this is a good video compared to other videos around making reviews. Clearly not yet, for sure. It might be outside of my audience, or it might be okay, but the chances of me figuring that out are pretty slim. I don't think it's going to get a big spike here. If it does, this will certainly be something we'll talk about on the podcast, as it's super interesting. So not a ton to say here. If you're interested in starting on YouTube, I think reviews is a great way to get started. Kind of the thesis of this video is no one knows you to start. No one cares about you. Even if you're at my size, 3,600 subscribers, no one really knows or cares about you still yet. Like, you're just starting to probably form a relationship with a small portion of your audience that's coming for you, or for your entertainment style, or for your tips, but it's not huge. People are still at this size really coming for, what have you done for me lately? What immediate value can you provide? And I think to get started on YouTube, to kind of learn some of those ropes, it's really important to lean into that a little bit. If you just want to get some traction, some views, some qualitative feedback in the comments, all of those things are important for, keeping your morale up to keep going, which is the number one thing. And so I think this is a good strategy to start with. Check it out if that's you. If not, it's not for you, probably don't check it out. And then the third video is the camera body comparison, 6 versus 7 versus 8. And this has really trailed off pretty strongly. I don't know if this will get another bump. Pretty low click-through rate overall. You can see it's trending upwards, but it's hard to put, I think we talked about this an episode or two ago, it's really hard to put stock in these numbers. Like, great, 10%, love to see that click-through rate. The problem is you're just not getting many impressions. And so, click-through rates when you're getting impressions in this range, in that 0 impressions to, 15,000, that's some real data. There's some real impression data there to, figure out what that impression click-through rate is. Here on this tail end, 18 through 19,000, we're really getting nothing over several days in the grand scheme. And so I don't want to look at this 10.9% and say, oh, this is indicative, right? Clearly it's 4.1 on average through this period. This is YouTube just still trying to test this out and see if it's a fit for anybody. And so far, not great. We can see we've got some R8, R6, R7 showing up in these search terms. If we pop this open, we can see they're all performing, relatively the same in terms of view duration and average percent viewed. So just not a lot standing out here. What I really want is some of these comparison terms, R7 versus R8, R6 versus R8, but just not quite seeing that yet. R6 versus R8, there's only one view. So yeah, average view duration higher than some of these other terms. Check. Can we make any determination off of one view, or even really off of, a couple handfuls? We shouldn't. So like I said, this is dense. The good news on this video is I've sort of solved this massive retention drop in the middle, or in the beginning, 72% of viewers still watching around that 30-second mark, which is above typical, is the tooltip that YouTube is giving us here. And you can see this retention graph is pretty flat. So part of that is because it's just a shorter video. It's shorter and dense. And so that kind of goes to, you've heard YouTube advice, people often say, like, make the video, it's hard to tell you how long your video should be. Your video should be as long as it needs to be. And this is a good example of this. I'm kind of giving you rapid fire, the differences in these three bodies, who they're for, who they're not for, what you should consider. And doing that from my experience, obviously have used the R6 for years and years, the R8 coming up on, 9 months-ish, and had a good month with the R7 where I shot with it a ton. Not a super long-term review, but when you're familiar with those other two cameras, a month is a good amount of time with the R7. There's not a lot to necessarily learn other than the differences. It's not like I'm stepping into another system with only a month of exposure. So I think I feel pretty confident that for the people looking to buy these cameras, I've pointed out some things that are worth pointing out. And I think the retention graph shows that it is a shorter video, so YouTube is not valuing this super high in terms of absolute retention, absolute view duration, only 2 minutes, 55 seconds. We'll have to see where this goes, if anywhere. And so the concept that I wanted to kind of bring to the surface based on these 3 stinkers is the idea of relative zero. Finger quotes. I'm doing finger quotes. You can't see me. But this came up on Colin and Samir when they were interviewing Hank Green recently. Great 2 hours and 10 minutes. Would highly recommend if you're into the meta to watch this. It's a great watch. But this view that relative zero, or it's this concept that relative zero is like, no matter how big you are on a platform, as a creator, you still kind of get this feeling sometimes of like this heavy sigh. Oh, no one's watching my videos. And when you first start out, relative zero is probably actual zero, absolute zero. Literally no one is watching your videos. And relative zero for someone like, Mr. Beast, no one's watching my videos could maybe mean getting 10 million views in the first day. So I was listening to this and this concept just kind of struck me as really fascinating and it really resonated. And I think it resonated because in this period, I was thinking to myself, no one is watching my videos. And if you're not familiar, that is not a good feeling. Maybe you've felt something similar if you've shared a photo to Instagram thinking that it was a little bit of a banger. You only get a handful of engagements on it. But I commented here, I said, relative zero is a crazy way to slap yourself awake and make you appreciate your progress when feeling down. And they give it a little like, it got a little traction. But for whatever reason, this just really stuck out to me. And I had a moment of like, wow, I'm being sort of an unthankful ass here. It's a little disrespectful to the hundreds or close to 1,000 people that are watching these videos that I just put out that I'm thinking of as no one's watching. People that have given me part of their day, on average 2 minutes and 55 seconds to watch this video. It was just a good mindset shift, I think, and to pivot that feeling of no one's watching my videos into something a little more like, damn, my relative zero these days feels like hundreds or low thousands of views. That's still really tiny, but it's actually kind of sick that I've gotten to that point that my relative zero is not actual zero, right? I think that's the hardest part about getting started and continuing on YouTube is getting away from the point where relative zero is actual zero, because actual zero is a tough spot. And I think for me, my relative zero right now feels like anything less than this. Oh, hello, 3605. My relative zero feels like anything less than this number when I get that number of views on a video. That's not probably healthy because subscribers are kind of a vanity metric these days. But, if my view counts don't get out of this like subscriber-based community in the first few weeks, I don't feel great. Like I said earlier, I think it's a good way to get started. That's the whole point of making the Recut sponsored video about it. With those search-based videos, I got pretty used to breaking past this subscriber number over time. So that's how I think my personal definition was formed. And certainly this is a concept to consider if you're making content online. If you're feeling down, take a moment to see, kind of ask yourself where you think your relative zero is. Like, what is the number of views that you start saying to yourself, like, shit, no one's watching this? And then take another moment to appreciate that number is greater than zero, assuming that it is. And if it's not, you might not have to go too much further to get to a point where your relative zero is off the ground. What else on this topic? In earlier episodes, I talked about going pretty hard in Q1, Q2 here. Let's zoom out 90 days. I wanted to try to get some growth, and we're kind of quickly approaching end of Q1, start of Q2 here. And I'm just struggling a bit on the freelance side of things, frankly. And so in a very real way, I think this channel is going to slowly return to my default, kind of my side project level of energy-ish put into it, which will be less than what I've been putting into it over the past few months. So I think that's a big reason that this relative zero, or thinking like it's feeling like a little bit of a rut, was top of mind. I feel like I haven't quite moved the needle with this like increased level of effort in the past few months in the way that I had hoped, at least. And I mean, if we zoom out to the last 365 days, that's a little bit dumb, right? It's a very imposter syndrome-y type of thought. I mean, 1,000 new people have subscribed since I started kind of this second shot at freelancing when I started that around here. So like 1,000 out of 3,600, and I'm over here moping about that. You look at the subscribers and views and watch time coming in, and And I feel like I've gotten increased comment engagement, and just that I start to see a few more familiar names. Like everything is trending up. It's just slow. I think that's how it goes at this point for a lot of people. And I don't know, this concept of relative zero really helped me reframe a bit of this for myself lately. All right, so that's all I wanted to say about relative zero. Let's lighten it up and do a little news, little news, do a little trip talk, do a little upcoming video talk. So in news, the most relevant thing to this channel here was that Lensrentals just acquired BorrowLenses. I'm a Lensrentals affiliate. It's one of the best ways to support this channel. If you're looking to rent, use the link and code in my description to save yourself some money on your rental. But I'm a big proponent of renting. I worked at BorrowLenses for over a year in the recent past, and so I think this is exciting. This was coming off the Nikon buys Red same day this news came out, so not quite as big as that, I think. And I see some people online in the comments like a little bit worried about what this means for rental prices, and I think that's a fair point to make, or a fair worry to have, like a fair thing to keep your eye on. My mind kind of immediately went to look, Lensrentals is now going to have a lot more gear, kind of 2 rental fleets worth of gear. And are they sort of the biggest game in town, sort of a monopoly in the online rental space? Probably, at least from a big name perspective. I think there are a lot of smaller ones. Obviously, if you have a good place locally you can rent from, that's ideal. You can save yourself on some shipping, you can drop it off. There's kind of no worry that it's going to get back or to you. That has never been a problem with me at Lensrentals, but obviously shipping is not a perfect science. Even companies like Lensrentals and BorrowLenses have issues with shipping, and sometimes when they do, it's not even the issue of the shipper necessarily. There's a lot of factors outside of everyone's control. Weather, COVID, there's all sorts of things that can come into play here. But if you have a local rental house, I would strongly encourage you to go there and support locally. But Lensrentals has worked great for me from an online standpoint. Obviously, there are advantages renting online as well, and they're picking up some good stuff from BorrowLenses and maybe a few good people as well. So even though I worked at BorrowLenses relatively recently, I don't really have any inside information on this. I didn't learn about this before you did, but I think my mind immediately again went to, for some of the harder things to keep in stock, I think this is good news. I think there's going to be more to pull from, and Lensrentals does have seemingly a better used selection. So, and I've never bought used from either rental house, but it's something that both did. So potentially, keep your eye on gear for sale here as they, I assume, start to incorporate that whole second BorrowLenses fleet of gear. Yeah, interesting news there. Like I said, Nikon also acquired Red. I don't have a lot to say here other than I think this is really exciting. We'll see what happens here in the future. It'll be interesting to see what happens on some of these body mounts. I think some of the Reds have the RF mount. Never used one, probably won't. But interesting to see as far as it relates to competition. The Fuji X100VI came out since our last episode. Big drop. This is showing as pre-order on Moment's site. I know Moment was doing a lot on socials and in preparation to get this camera out. I think, pre-order, back order. This is probably back ordered into the next century. Shipping status 3:10 at 6 a.m. This is actually just today. We received word from Fuji on the allocation we're expected to receive week of 3/11, notifying customers. So Moment has been, and I think a lot of retailers have been doing this, but I've seen, because I'm a Moment affiliate and I'm a big fan, I've been paying attention to their socials most. I think they've been really on top of communicating to people who have pre-ordered as they get stuff in to really let you know where your stuff is in line. And, unfortunately for most of the world, you're in a deep line, but hopefully, yeah, like they're saying, most anticipated camera ever, potentially. Hopefully you get to see this before too long. And I think this is actually, obviously we talk about, as it relates to Fuji, these film simulations. This isn't super exciting to me. When I think about how this camera might fit to my workflow, I'm really more interested in what this video looks like. Which seems like some pretty impressive video specs for something this tiny. And the 40 megapixels and that in-camera cropping, definitely another thing that would be interesting to me. I think they've added IBIS since the last iteration here. And, if this were to, who knows how long this makes it on a single charge, but this is not, some people might say this is expensive for a camera like this. This is awful similar to a Canon R8 with a 28mm pancake, which is going to run you just about the same. And if you want a few more megapixels than the Canon and you want some of these video specs like 240, this is awful similar to the price of what a Canon R8 and an RF 28mm pancake is going to run you. And it's pretty similar. Obviously some big differences in the body and stuff, but this is, there's also big differences in the features, right? This has IBIS, the Canon R8 does not. And so if this can record in 4K 24 and not overheat and make it a full hour 15 on one battery, all of a sudden this starts to become more alluring to me in the use cases that I'm using the Canon for. Other than the fact, obviously the R8 can use all my interchangeable lenses, but for this travel use case, for this wide fixed prime that has some room to crop, I think this is really interesting. Like, setting aside the hype, I think this is a really interesting offering, and I'm excited to see this out. And I hope they can keep up with demand. And I'm really looking forward to, checking in on some of the creators that I like and seeing what they have to say about it. I know a lot of people are after it. Now, other thing, and this is not a Canon product, but the other thing that has come out recently or has been announced for pre-order was the Sony 24-50 f2.8G lens. And I think this is super exciting. I think this got some heat, not some heat, but I think this is a spicy offering for some people. A lot of people saying like, I don't really want to give up that 50 to 70. I totally hear that because, obviously on this channel, I've been a big proponent of having that 70 to 105. But recently I've talked about wanting to try a new system this year. And this is the type of lens that if I imagine trying Sony, like this is something that solves a ton of my use cases if I were to pick up a Sony body, right? So wide and fast, so great for talking head, great for travel, is relatively small, pretty cheap. You're saving at least $1,000 off of some of those bigger primes. So you're getting that extra stop of light over the f4s with a decent zoom range, at least for landscape first shooters. That's kind of me when I'm traveling and hiking. And so do I want a little bit more on that range? Sure. But this also is going to be better for Astro at that 24 f2.8 than something like the 24 to 105 f4 that I have on the Canon system. Again, not looking to move the Canon system. If I talk about trying another system, it's really in conjunction with the R6 and my Core 4 lenses. And so the idea, as I think about trying another system, is kind of, okay, what is a lens that I can add and immediately get a ton of value in a lot of my use cases? And so to me, this looks like a great candidate. Wide, fast, do a little Astro, do a ton of landscape, 52.8, not the magical portrait focal length and an aperture that you might want, but definitely usable for sure for some great portraits. Relatively small, relatively light, and relatively inexpensive. I think this is super interesting. Would love to see Canon come out with something like this. And I don't think, we have to see what Canon's going to put out. The reason I want to explore another system is because Canon is not really showing us what they're going to do this year yet. Lots still up in the air. And as I've talked about time and time again, I'm hesitant to invest in something like a 15 to 35. I'm hesitant to invest in something like a 100 to 500. I'm hesitant to even invest in something like a 14 to 35. I really would like to know what Canon is doing with third party, regardless of whether or not I'm going to pick up a third party lens next. I want to know what they're doing with their new bodies. I just need to see more. They've been really closed. And I just need to see more before I vote with my dollar and give them more of my money. So something like this is interesting to me because I think this is something that would fit really well on a trip. And we can pivot to that next on the trip front. I've held off mentioning this trip so far because it's not a true photocentric trip. It's more of a family vacation. Obviously, photography for me does play a big role on those trips, but it's not something I've wanted to hype up. And I don't want to change the course of the trip to create content, to create videos. And that's an important thing that I like to keep reminding myself of and to kind of keep reminding others here. There's almost like a hierarchy of needs to satisfy in order, in the order of how these videos get made, right? If I break it down by activity, by my enjoyment, it's kind of step one, shoot in the field. I like that. It's usually tied to travel or the outdoors. So good stuff there. That's all fun. Second, it's jumping into Lightroom and Photoshop and seeing if I can spin any of my trash into gold. And I know everyone has a different take here, but I like editing as much or more than the actual shooting, especially now as I'm kind of struggling through finding my style and how much I want to edit in terms of over or under editing. So before you even see a video, I'm trying to pretty strictly prioritize joy for myself in those first two activities. Step 1 and 2, I'll continue to do as long as I like photography, probably decades. And those 2 steps are unbeknownst to you if I stop making YouTube videos. I'll still be doing them, but you won't know about it. And then finally, 3, it's kind of enjoying that creative process of putting together video content around these stills to get them seen, because Instagram kind of sucks. Well, actually 4 is like the meta of growing the YouTube channel itself with the individual videos. So the strategy, the data, this podcast, we'll call it monetization because it definitely isn't fair to call it a business. But the point is that, this trip agenda is not to make content, but I'm excited to see what I can make without much direction going in. And it's a big trip. I'm headed to New Zealand. I'm absolutely dreading the travel to get there. 5-hour flight to San Francisco and then another 13 to Auckland. And I've agonized a bit over the gear front. I just find it harder to pack for flights. I want to stay small, but I want to, make sure I bring enough to feel covered. It's kind of a once in a lifetime thing. So that's already just, before even getting there, a little bit stressful. Kind of the stakes are feeling a little bit higher. I've only flown with gear once because I was getting into photography, pretty seriously right as the pandemic started. So I've flown to Ireland and the stakes didn't feel super high there. I think that's a place that I'll definitely get back to, potentially even sooner than later. So it didn't feel like this once in a lifetime trip. This definitely does. And I find it harder to pack for flights. So I was thinking for a little bit that I wanted to lean into primes, probably bring that Sigma 28 and the Samyang 85 and kind of forcefully establish a creative direction from a focal length perspective for the trip itself, but kind of getting cold feet on that big time. So what I'm tentatively bringing is the stuff that doesn't let you down ever. It's, playing it safe, bringing the 24-105 f4, bringing the 70-200 f4, bringing the R6, the R8, probably going to skip the battery grip. I don't think it's going to fit super well. And then I'm going to try to sneak in the 28 Pancake and Nifty 50 and slither the GoPro in as well. And I really like the GoPro mounted on the cold shoe mount for things like this because it's a way to kind of effortlessly in the moment to capture it. It's a pain in the ass to review the footage later, but kind of effortlessly, in quotes, capture some video of the photo taking process. And that really helps. And that really helps sometimes as B-roll when, creating the edit after the trip itself, like I'm going to try to do here. And so from an upcoming video perspective, sort of unsure about what's going to come out of it. First, and unrelated, prior to the trip, I'd like to get out one more video in Lightroom, editing shots from the 100 and 400 and on the R6 and R7. So, hit on some of these things from an editing perspective in that video, show a little bit more of my process there, and talk a little bit more about the struggles of over versus under editing, how I think about that, and a little bit about AI and generative fill, things like that I've been using. And then from a New Zealand standpoint, I feel like I've said all that I needed to say about the 24-105 and 70-200. I feel like I have dense, good reviews out there that are getting seen and people are receptive, talking in the comments. Like, I think I have that covered. So in a way, the videos around those will likely be less review focused. I might not even make the videos about those lenses in particular alone. And I'll have some leeway to really try another format or two. So if there's something that you want to see or you're particularly curious about, let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to get a little weird with those ones. And I would love to wrap the batch of New Zealand videos like a formal quote R8 review. I'm really looking forward to having that small option. Again, that's why people like the X100VI, X100V. And my most fun days in the field are just kind of running around with 2 bodies on the hike. So the R8 is interesting because I've been open here that I only plan to keep that for 6 to 9 months. I know that I've wanted to keep it through this trip, keep it through a period of making lots more content and then move it along. But recently, and this gets a little into the freelance, I've picked up 4 or 5 shoots in the last 2 months and I've already used it for each shoot. And I really like having 2 bodies when freelance shooting starts to represent a non-negligible chunk of my revenue. So we'll see what I do there. And like I said, I've been pretty open about the fact that I'd like to try another system this year alongside the R6, that I'm kind of unwilling to invest deeply in Canon at the moment, and that the R8, R6 combo is a little too similar. Those bodies are a little too similar long-term for how I'd like to think of my 2-body strategy. So as long as my work continuously looks like a mix of podcast production and photography, like if that's roughly equal in a way that, it wasn't until recently, the R8 might not be going anywhere fast. We'll see. Maybe I'll keep it for a bit longer. And I think that's all I have for now. Kind of a lot of different topics, a little bit all over the place. But thanks for tuning in. If you're still here at the end of episode 12, consider sharing this with someone. I'd like to continue to make this show more valuable for you. So, any additional feedback, more eyes on it really helps make that happen. We are still doing an episode every 100 subscribers until we hit 5,000. So I will see you at 3,700 later.